Welcome to the CSS Essential Training Series. I'm Mike King, your instructor for this tutorial. And in this tutorial, we're going to be talking about styling elements, using the style element in HTML to style the elements on your HTML document. So styling elements using CSS with the style element inside your HTML document. So in this tutorial, we'll look at using the style element in our HTML document. The HTML style element contains style information for an HTML document or a part of that document. The actual style information is contained inside the elements, usually in the form of CSS. And the style element has access to the global attributes available for the HTML elements that it resides in. The style element is normally located in the head section of the HTML document, and up until HTML5 it had to be located in the head section of the HTML document. But there's a couple changes in HTML5 that allow us to do some other things with scoping this particular style element. And it defines styles that are information for a document. So it defines the styles for that particular document inside those style tags. So inside the style element, you define how elements for the HTML page should display in the browser window using CSS, and HTML documents can contain multiple style tags inside of the head section. And actually, with the changes in HTML5, if they're scoped, the style tags can actually be inside elements of HTML5. Style tags used for declaring style sheets within our HTML document. Each HTML document can contain multiple style tags. In an HTML5, the style tag can be used within the body element or its child elements as long as the scope attribute is used. And we'll demonstrate this as we go through this tutorial as to how you actually scope this. And if the scoped attribute is not used, each style tag must be located in the head section. New to HTML5 are the media element or attribute, the scoped attribute, and the type attribute. And as you can see, the media has a value of media query, and it specifies what media device the media's resource is optimized for, whether it be screen, printed material, mobile display. So we can actually define inside the attribute how this thing is designed, what it's actually specified for. Scope specifies that the styles only apply to this element's parent element and the element's child element. So if I scope a style tag inside of an element, it only applies to that parent and the children of that parent. And the type specifies the MIME type of the actual styling. So let's move into our development environment and let's demonstrate the things we've talked about in the presentation. Alright, so as I do in all our tutorials, I'm going to go ahead and drop out of our presentation. Let's go confirm that our development environment is up and running. First thing I want to do is make sure we got our Apache server up and running in the background in our web development environment. That looks good. The document structure I've got for this particular tutorial, I've got my _CSS folder, my _images folder, even though they won't be used in this particular exercise. They're available in my web root where we'll be storing our files. The next thing I want to do is I want to make sure I've got my browser loaded up in that web root, which I do. Tutorial _016 styling with the style tag. So I've got my browser window up and running. I've got my text editor up with a brand new untitled document in the window so that we've got our new document to save in. I'm going to go into my example files folder. I'm going to go ahead and grab my basic template. I'm going to copy that. I'm going to paste it into my document window. Let's make sure my word wrap is on. We got the word wrap on. That's good. Let me go ahead and clean up my styling here. And then I'll set this up so that you all can type this in if you need to, if you don't have access to the exercise files. One more thing to clean, then I'll go back to the top of our page. Alright, be a good time to pause if you need to copy this into your text editor. I'm going to go ahead and scroll down. Another good time to pause if you need to copy that into your text editor. Now what I'm going to do is inside my 016 folder, I'm going to go ahead and do a save. I'm going to save this as the basic template of my 016 style tag tutorials. So I'm just going to type basic template .html and save that. Let's go ahead and refresh our browser window. Let's go ahead and bring that up in the browser, and now we've got our document up in the browser window that we're going to use to demonstrate our style tags throughout this tutorial. Alright, so the first thing we discussed in our presentation, we talked about using the style tag in the head section of our document. So HTML actually has style attributes or style tags that we can use inside this head section where we can style portions of our document. So I'm going to come right below my link, and there's a reason I'm actually going below the link, and we'll talk about that when we get into more specifics about styling using CSS. But because of the cascade effect, there's things that happen in a particular order. So if I were to put my style attributes here, my style tags, below this link attribute or link tag, what's happened now is I'm going to load the style sheet. If I had an external style sheet, all those styles will take effect in my document. Then I'm going to run the styles that are part of my head element inside my style tags. And then I'm going to load any styles that are inline. So based on the specificity of the actual styles will determine what styles would override which. By putting these style tags below my link reference to my external style sheets, they're going to have a higher priority than the actual linked style sheet. And you'll see demonstrations of that as we go through the CSS tutorials much further on. But to demonstrate the style tag, we put our opening and closing style tags in the head section of our document. And the first thing I want to do, I'm going to use my universal selector, which is the star, my opening curly brace and my closing curly brace. I'm going to go ahead and reset our margins and paddings. Because if you remember, when we were going through our tutorials inside HTML, I talked to you about global resets or CSS resets for our documents. We haven't applied any of those to these particular templates in CSS, so I'm going to go ahead and use this universal selector, which is the star. What that does is that pertains to every selector inside of CSS. So every P, every body tag, every tag that we have available now inside of our HTML document, we're going to give it a margin of 0 pixels, semicolon, and then a padding of 0 pixels. So we're basically resetting everything regardless of the default settings for the browser. We're resetting everything to 0. I'm going to do a save as. I want to go ahead and save this as chapter 16 underscore 01. .html. So if you have access to the exercise files, you'll actually have copies of these. Let's go back and refresh our browser and load that document up. And you'll notice now I've gotten rid of the margins and paddings using the style tags inside of my HTML element. So real quick, one other thing we can do, let's come on down here and let's demonstrate another thing we can do with our style tags. I'm going to go ahead and style the actual HTML element. And if you remember from back in an earlier tutorial, we talked about the HTML element being the root element of our document. Because if you think about it, HTML element, that's the first element that we hit. Everything on the page, everything that pertains to that HTML document is inside the HTML elements. Even the stuff we don't see, like the stuff in the head section, that all pertains to the HTML element. So we call it the root element. I'm going to give it a width of 100%. Oops. I will give it a width of 100% if I'm in the right section of the document. So let's give it a width of 100%. And that with a semicolon. I'm going to come down. I'm going to give it a background color. And that with a colon. Let's give it a background color of a light gray. That's a CCC. And that with a semicolon. Come down, give it a font family. With a colon, let's give it a font family of Arial, comma, Helvetica, comma, and sans serif, since they are all sans serif fonts. And let's go ahead and give the font a color. And again, this is default now for the entire document of 03F. And that with a semicolon, let's go ahead and change or save that document, save the changes to that document. Let's go ahead and refresh our browser window. And you'll see now that we've got the text in blue. It's taken on the default font family that we've given it, which is Arial, Helvetica, or sans serif in that order. If it finds Arial, it'll use it. If it's not there, it goes to Helvetica. If it can't find either one of the fonts, it actually goes to any good sans serif font or the default sans serif font for your PC or Mac. And then it gave the font a color of blue based on the hexadecimal color values that I gave it 03F. So we've actually styled the HTML element. We've styled we've set the margins and paddings for the entire document back to a 0 or a reset. And that's the first example of how we use the style element inside of our HTML document to style our page. Notice now that these values took effect across the entire document, whereas in the earlier tutorial when we were actually demonstrating inline, they were only pertaining to a particular area of the document, whether it be the heading or that particular paragraph. Alright, so we've styled the HTML element. We've given our universal selector to set our margins and paddings. We've styled the HTML element. Now let's go ahead and style our body element so you can see how we can start impacting the individual areas of our web document, our HTML document. So I type in the element name, which is the body tag, my opening and closing curly braces. I give this a width of 80%, and we're going to talk about this for 1 minute. Because if you remember right, at the HTML document, I gave a width of 100%, which is 100% of the browser window. And you'll notice as we stretch this out, that HTML element takes up 100% of that window, and the background color stays that light gray. Very cool. Now what I'm doing with the body element, because the body element is contained inside the HTML element, because you'll notice here's our body element. It falls inside our HTML element because our body element, both the opening tag and the closing tag, are inside. It's properly nested in the HTML element. So now I'm styling that, and I say you have a width of 80%. That's 80% of its parent container. So because I gave the HTML element 100%, my body element is only going to be 80% of that 100%. Let's give it a different background color. And as you go through the CSS tutorials, you'll learn much more about how we do this. I'm going to give it a background color of FFF, and what I'm talking about is this nesting, these percentages, how certain parent elements will assume the characteristics, the children will assume the characteristics of the parent. Alright, so I've given it a width of 80%, and I've given it a different background color of FFF. That's a white background color. Let's go ahead and save those changes. I'm going to do a save as. Let's go ahead and save that as chapter 16 _02.html. Let's go ahead and go back and refresh our browser window and load that new document, and you'll notice now that my body element is 80% as white as the HTML element, and my background is white. The one thing I haven't done, and it will stay 80% by the way, as I stretch, it will maintain 80% of its parent element based on the setting that I gave it inside here of 80%. But if I wanted to keep it centered, what I want to do is I want to put a margin on the right and left. So let's go margin right, semicolon. And since I don't know what it's going to be because I need it to figure this out, I'm going to say auto because I want it to stay centered as I resize that page. So I want it to become responsive to the size of the actual browser window. Same thing with margin left. I'm going to say colon. I want to make that auto also. And that with a semicolon. Let's go ahead and save those changes. Let's refresh this browser window, and that body element now should move to the center of our HTML element, and you notice that it did. And as we resize it, it'll stay 80%, but it'll stay centered inside of our HTML element based on the fact that we gave it a margin right and margin left of auto. So it's automatically calculating the sizes of that particular space that's left. I should have 10% on the right, 10% on the left, 80% in the center. Alright, so you can see how using the style tag inside the head section of our HTML document actually makes styling a little bit more efficient as we're styling our HTML page. Still not the most efficient way to do this, especially if we had hundreds of pages, but for styling an individual page, this becomes much more efficient because we're actually targeting areas of the page now, not just single individual elements. One thing I do want to talk about is a change in HTML5. We can actually scope the style tag. Up until HTML5, the style tag had to be maintained inside the head section. There's our opening head tag and our closing head tag. Had to be maintained inside the head section of our HTML element, or HTML document. We don't have to do that anymore if we scope the style tag. So let me show you what I mean. If I were to go in and scope an H1 tag, let's say I came down in here and I actually have an H1 tag. So let's try this. Let's say style scoped. And let's close that style tag. Now I'm inside my HTML, my H1 element. And actually what I want to do is I want to come down here. So style scope. Now I'm going to come down inside here and I'm going to close the style tag. And inside those style tags, I'm going to say H1. Let's have my opening curly brace, my closing curly brace. Let's give it a color of red. And that with a semicolon. And let's give it a font size. Colon 1.7em. So I've got 1.7ems as a font size. And I've got a color of red. I'm going to save this. And keep in mind now this only pertains to the parent element and any children of that parent because it's scoped. And by the way I have these style tags placed, there are no children of the H1 element, just the H1 element itself. So if I were to bring that up, you'll notice that now our H1 element has changed its size and it's now colored red. What if I were to make this an H1 element, but I included this in a div? So let's say I were to take this whole area, this whole section, in fact actually let's just leave it in the section and move this here, move this style element outside or into the section. I'm just setting up my tabs. Again, it makes it easier for me to follow what's going on. So now I've got my H1 element, which is a child of the section. Remember we talked about when we defined scope? It's the parent element and all children of that parent element. So now what I'm doing is I'm styling any H1 that falls in this section. So when I refresh this browser window, I should be able to save this change. Let's save this as a 03. Do a save there. We're saving that as a 03. Let's go back, refresh our browser window and load 03. You'll notice we saw no difference. But the difference, the way I've set it up here now, the way I've scoped it, I could actually go into the style tag because don't I also have an H2 element that's a child of this parent? Because if you'll notice I've got an H2 and a P tag. I could actually style the H2 element also. I could actually come down here and say H2. Goodness gracious, I'm having trouble typing. So I've got my H2 element, my opening and closing curly brace, and what if I just wanted to make the H2 element color blue? Or no, let's say color green. That should stand out pretty good. And that's all I want to do. But remember, that H2 is also a child element of this section. So if I save that change and refresh, you'll notice now the H2 element changed to green text. This is actually pretty cool the way we can scope this now. The styling element can be scoped into a parent, and then the children of that parent you can style individually. I can actually see where there could be some reasons where I may want to use this on some particular sites. I haven't run into it yet where I'd want to use it, but I can see where this could come in handy because now I can do a lot of styling inside the style tags and scope them just to the area that they're in, especially with the new tag elements in HTML5. By having the section elements, the aside elements, I mean, they actually open up areas now where we can get individual styling based on a group of things inside those sections or inside those asides of HTML5. That's pretty cool. I haven't found a reason to use it yet, but I think it's a pretty cool change to the attribute style in HTML5. Alright, so I hope you enjoyed this section of the tutorials, and this concludes styling elements using the style element, which was part 2 of this series. And in the next part, we're actually going to look at using external style sheets in CSS and how they can effectively style entire websites by using your CSS declarations inside of an external CSS file. So I look forward to seeing you in the next tutorial.